Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we are continuing with our weekly series of shirim on the Torah of recovery and the recovery of Torah with the light revealed, where we try and illuminate the human condition through the power of the Torah and to reveal the power of the Torah that rests within the human condition. And in this week's Parsha Shmini, one of the elements that express themselves most intensely and find the most significant placement within the rest of the year, especially on Yom Kippurim, at the heart of the experience, like we spoke about, is the story of Nadav and Avihu, the two children, the tzaddikim of Aron HaKohen, who offered up a foreign flame, entered into the place of the Kodesh HaKadoshim in a way that theoretically was not aligned with the precise way it needed to be for tzaddikim of that level, and ultimately their lives were lost and they were oile to Shemayim in an act of self-sacrifice. Now, this brings to the forefront the notion of an unspeakable tragedy. There's an unspeakable nature to the tragedy here in the sense that we're dealing with tzaddik v'tovlo, we're dealing with theoretically someone who's doing everything they possibly can in this world to get it right. Aron HaKohen, tzaddik yisod olam, was trying as hard as he could to get it right, acknowledging his mistakes, so to speak, when it came to the Egel HaZahav, acknowledging his role, undertaking the process of being lower than his brother for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shlichus. Aron HaKohen was a prime example of righteousness revealed. It was the expression of Chachma in reality. Aron HaKohen was the Tzaddik Yesod Olam. And we tend to assume that if a person is of such a lofty level, then things will operate in a certain way for them. We assume that the good are given goodness and that evil is responded to with evil, but that good should be responded to with difficulty, or that difficulty should be responded to with good. This was ultimately the question that rests at the heart of reality that Moshe Rabbeinu comes to terms with not being able to answer. The question of the righteous who something negative happens to, and those who operate in a negative way, the wicked who have something positive happening to them. And Moshe Rabbeinu and Aron HaKohen both accept the fact that we can never have a full understanding of the order in which reality takes shape. We do not have a full understanding with regards to the fairness or the unfairness of reality, or our human minds are too frail and too limited in their essence to comprehend the process in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is revealing redemption at every level in our lives, on a collective, on a personal process. And therefore, the demand to know, the demands for justice, the demands for absolute clarity as to the righteousness of this action is not what is at stake here. Aron HaKohen is able, like the tzaddikim, like anybody who faces unspeakable things, with a silent courage that is capable of facing it, and in spite of the fact that feeling that it's not fair, nevertheless seeing through it and cultivating the spiritual process through it. That is what the avodah of Aron HaKohen is in response to this tragedy of Nadav and Avihu. And we're going to see how ultimately, in the external teachings of Torah, the process of Nadav and Avihu is a tragedy. It's an unspeakable tragedy. And the pshat of the Torah never shifts. And therefore, there's an element of the unspeakable nature of this tragedy that exists whenever a person is discussing the narrative of Nadav and Avihu. But once we understand Aron HaKohen's response to the death of Nadav and Avihu, to that unspeakableness of the things that take place in this world, and again, the unspeakable things should be minor, but we know that very often they're not minor. And we all encounter that unspeakability at the heart of certain experiences, at the heart of certain feelings, at the heart of certain fears or concerns or remembrances or memories. We all encounter that place of duma, that place of speechlessness, that place of not being able to express what it is that I'm feeling. And what Aron HaKohen is going to teach us is how to properly encounter those moments. And by encountering those difficult moments through the lens of how to orient myself properly, ultimately that external casing of the Nadav and Avihu story still remains, but there's an inner kernel of significance that ascends out of the unspeakableness of the tragedy to reveal how the inner teachings of Torah look at Nadav and Avihu, which is that Nadav and Avihu represent the heights of spirituality, and that each and every person to a certain degree is attempting to model themselves in a healthy way, in an oriented way, to the koach of Nadav and Avihu, to those tzaddikim who are willing to be moser nafsham, those parts of ourselves that are moser nefesh, al kedushas Hashem, who understand that when there is a time that HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs desire to be uncovered and to move upwards to the infinite realms of spirit. So there are tzaddikim, there are people, there are parts of ourselves who are willing to take those roles on, in spite of the fact that it might have some deleterious effect on ourselves. We're going to see how in the inner teachings of Torah, the life of Nadav and Avihu is seen as a life of continued Kodesh HaKadoshim. And so what we're going to have is an event that, externally speaking, continues and remains an unspeakable tragedy, but with the proper grappling with it and the proper mournful process and the going through the stages of grief properly through that reality of Nadav and Avihu, a person doesn't simply come to terms with the reality of Nadav and Avihu moments in this world. And again, they should all be the softest of all soft, and all of Klal Yisrael's Nadav and Avihu offerings should be enough already, and it should bring Mashiach Tzidkenu b'mhera b'yameinu tekefu miyad. But nevertheless, we will all encounter those unspeakable processes, those Nadav and Avihu moments where there's nothing to do other than to learn how to properly respond. And then by properly responding to it internally, I will come to see the situation in a different light. Not a new light that erases the difficulty or the struggle, but rather a new light that is capable of understanding that very often the difficulty or the struggle or that which appears unspeakable contains the deepest levels of faith imaginable, contains the deepest secrets of avoda, and how a person connects themselves to the innermost point of their relationship with God, with other, and with self in this world. Now, the pasuk tells us that after Nadav and Avihu tragically are taken from this world and they ascend as a result of the strange foreign flame, the movement of self into the process of connecting to the divine, and when self is not refined in those delicate places, it can have tremendous negative impact for the individual, and it can be a negative teaching moment. And therefore, it was fundamental to show within the framework of healthy spirituality what was desired and what was not desired. And in this undesired flame, Nadav and Avihu went upwards into a place of connectivity to the infinite that was simply incapable of coming back down, similar to the process of Ben Azai in the four who entered into the orchard, where they also kind of were unable to come back down because of how high up they tried to run. And in the face of this, Aron HaKohen is a person, unlike Nadav and Avihu. Aron HaKohen is a grounded individual, a grounded tzaddik, a tzaddik who has come to be aware of his imperfection, a tzaddik who is just coming off of the process of the egel, just coming off of the process of feeling responsible and feeling a certain element of guilt over Klal Yisrael's terrible, traumatic descent into the Chet HaEgel. And Aron HaKohen is coming out of the Chet HaEgel with a newfound awareness of not fully understanding, with a newfound awareness of not knowing the words to say, of understanding that there's certain decisions that get made that have negative impacts in a person's life, in spite of the fact that there were proper motivations and there are positive actions that come about by way of negative motivations. And Aron HaKohen is coming with a far more mature nature of spirituality, Kaviyachol, than what Nadav and Avihu are expressing. Nadav and Avihu are expressing the desire to move upwards completely out of this world and to find transcendence. Aron HaKohen is a person who understands the significant responsibility that one has to draw transcendence back down here, into the vessels, into the Mishkan, into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, into the osios themselves that are carried on the heart of the Kohen Gadol. Aharon HaKohen represents the wisdom of the Tzaddik Emes, who knows that I have to be above and below at once. I have to learn how to live in the transcendent mindset, as well as the immanency of what it means to be a human being. Nadav and Avihu represent the more, so to speak, immature drive of spirituality, which seeks ultimate transcendence without the necessity of coming back down into a place of immanence. We have to draw upwards so that we can draw back down, like Aron HaKohen teaches us. Nadav and Avihu was simply an ascent upwards without a desire to draw anything back down. And while those flights of fancy and spiritual bliss are powerful, they're also intoxicating. And in that intoxication, they become addictive and they take a person out of this world just as any other object of desire. So the wisdom of Aron HaKohen is the wisdom of going up and coming back down, and that mature process of knowing that spirituality must find receptacles to be expressed in this world. And that comes about through the process of confronting kind of the fallibility and the struggle of what it means to be somewhat responsible for the egel, of the miscommunication between Klal Yisrael and Moshe Rabbeinu. And Aharon is coming with the deep humility that represents the Nekuda Panimis, the innermost point of his holiness, as opposed to Nadav and Avihu's avoda at that point, which is just seeking transcendence, that the stench of the world gets far too thick sometimes, and the tzaddik feels that they have to ascend upwards completely, removed completely, and erasing any of the requirements to live within the vicissitudes of human experience. And that natural desire to escape this world, even in the most refined ways, through the most potent forms of spirituality, is nevertheless, we see that Aron HaKohen is confronting the reality that that is not the way, but rather it has to be drawn into vessels. It has to be drawn back down. And in Aharon's process of mourning this loss of life of Nadav and Avihu, we're going to see him express this very principle most powerfully. Aron HaKohen's response is Vayidom Aharon, and Aharon was silent in the face of the tragedy. Aharon did not have words. Aharon did not choose to express what he was feeling. Aharon was fundamentally aware of the inexpressibility of what he was feeling, and that the only way for Aharon HaKohen to express that which could not be expressed was in the secret of understanding how to enter into silence. There's a silence that is born out of ignorance. There's a silence that is born of having nothing to say, which is always something that operates in the individual's mind. And then a person graduates from that first form of silence into the space of speech where a person feels that they have something to say. And then ultimately, after speech, one comes to realize that all I've ever been saying is what cannot truly be said, which is ultimately rooted in the Shem Havaya that cannot be expressed fundamentally. And then comes a silence that follows speech. It's a silence that comes to be aware of the frailty of speech. It doesn't tell us to stop speaking. There's a silence at the heart of our speech. There's a silence that makes all of the words that a person is saying ultimately say one thing, which is the nothingness of what can't be said. That ever moving attempt to say what we want to say without ever being able to say it, that reality of exile of Dibor, that Golus HaDibor, which is the process of being thrown into Mitzrayim. And in that space, a person comes to a place of shtoik, kach ala b'machshava, of silence. A person reaches a place of silence. A person reaches a place of inner quietude, of a silence of the mind and a silence of the world and a silence of any other external motivating factors or stimuli other than the nekuda hapenimis that exists in the kodesh hakadashim of the individual's mind. Only Aron HaKohen within each and every one of us has the access point to that shtika of the kodesh hakadashim, to that place of vayidom Aharon, to that pach shemen, which is always purified, to that place of the pure stillness of silence that starts with having absolutely nothing to say, but then becomes a tunnel to bring to that place where there's never anything to say, because l'cha dumya tehila, Rabbanu Shlalem. There's no words that can express what I feel. There's no words that could express the heaviness and the grandeur and the beauty and the lightness of all of it. Depending on whatever the circumstance is, there's a duma, there's a shtika. And Aron HaKohen goes through, so to speak, these processes that first and foremost, the vayidom is that there has to be something to say, but words fail. Words fail. There's a desire to speak, but as any trauma does, it takes away the agency of language. A person can no longer convey what is going on internally to the person outside, which is the gesher and the kesher, as Rav Hutner would say, of Dibor. That speech allows my innermost essence to be expressed externally so that the other can receive my essence, so that they can find empathy or sympathy with me to help alleviate and bring me out of that stuckness. But when the trauma takes place and the unspeakable nature of the trauma is what rests at the core of it very often, is that I no longer can convey my inner reality, either because it's too much or it's too little or I don't trust anymore, but speech gets caught up. Now, speech that gets caught up, when it still wants to speak, will eventually become claustrophobic. It's one thing to be silent if one feels that there's nothing to be said, but with the deep desire to say everything and more, but the inability to say anything, the claustrophobia of the mumbled and jumbled letters that are now occupying the inner space of the individual's heart and mind to the point of saturation, it needs to find expression. And this is why speaking in that place is nafshi yotze b'diburei. That speech from that place of silence where I feel that I have so much to say, it's opening my mouth and allowing my neshama to express itself fully, the catharsis of speech, the speaking cure of mi sam peh adam, that giving a mouth to the individual, giving a mouth to the person who felt that they couldn't speak. That's a fundamental process of alleviating the burden of all of the words that need to be said. All of the words that need to be said. And that's the secret of Daiga b'levish yasichena la'achirim, that the therapeutic model is hinged upon the two understandings of what Chazal see as this pasuk in Mishlei, meaning Daiga b'levish yasichena la'achirim, there's worry in the heart of the individual, they should speak it out to another person. In Chazal and Maseches Yom, in the place of Yom Kippur, in the place of Aron HaKohen, in the place of Kodesh HaKadoshim, that avoida of shtika and speech at once, of chash and mal. So one shita says yasichena with a sin smoilis, which means converse it with another person, speak it out with the other person. And one manda amr says yasichena with a samich, which represents the ability to divert it from one's attention. And be'emes, as the Mittler Rebbe points out, both are representative of the same nekuda, that by speaking it out, I divert it from my attention. Nafshi yatsa b'dibura. But that's the stage of speaking prior to coming to silence. When I feel that I can't speak, that's when I need to speak. That's when I need to convey information. But once I've conveyed the information and my silence has been gotten over, then I come to a new level of silence. Then I come to a place of the silence that rests at the heart of all possible words. The silence that Aron HaKohen is encountering. The silence that says, if I allow myself to enter into the place of words or verbiage or the attempt to define what it is that I'm going through right now, I'll get lost in the particulars of the problem. I'll get lost in the particulars of the feeling. But there's a path, there's a royal road to that place of expansivity where in the silence of the self, I come to terms with the fact that I'm saying everything and I'm ultimately aware that nothing that I say will cover what I want to say, and therefore I am comfortable in the silence. Vayidom Aron, Aron enters into that place of silence. Aron enters into that place of the inanimate nature of the self. That part, the Yechida Shebenefesh, that Kodesh HaKadoshim, every other part is in perpetual movement, grappling with, struggling with, trying to orient the self towards, trying to make reason out of. The mind is always perpetually in action. Every midah, every part of our soul, the nefesh, the ruach, the neshama, the chaya, all of those elements are perpetually engaging. They're dealing with reality. In the Yechida, in the innermost point of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, there's a stillness that abides. It's an ever-present stillness that doesn't need to move anywhere because there is nowhere to move because it's a singular point that contains all. It can only move within itself, creating an inner friction that provides some semblance of a feeling that the heart can maybe touch it, but the moment that I try and grasp it, I come to realize that I can't fully grasp it. On the level of the Yechida, there's a demima, there's a shtika, there's a shatik rav, there's a silencing of the self, a silencing of the noise, a silencing of all of the fears and the confusion and the emotions and the graspability and ungraspability of all things. And it's an entering into that place where I am no longer an animate object, I am an inanimate object. I'm a doimim. As the tzaddikim say that V'yidom Aron, Aron turned himself into a doimim. Aron made himself like an inanimate object that is unfeeling in its essence, not because it's callous, not because of a trauma, but because there is no such thing about the feeling. It abides. The object is what it is. The rock is what it is. It's an inanimate object. It does what it does. Water flows. It's inanimate. It's doimim. Everything that it is in itself. It's present. It's without judgment. It's operating in a place of damam v'shtika, realizing that Rebbeinu Shleilam, I am just an object to you. I am just an object in this world like any other creature or creation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you are the master of the show. You are the one with the dibur. You are the one with the asar ma'amaros, the 10 utterances and the asar sadibros and the 10 statements that animate reality. You're the one who speaks reality into being. My job is to attune myself to the inner silence that rests at the core of it, in the heart of all of the noise, to become a rock, to become a stone, to become an Evan. Like David Malka Mashiach, the secret of Evan, Maso Abanim, Haisler Rosh Pina, silence in the face of the Bizyono, silence in the face of the fear, making oneself into a doimim. The Brisker Rav, Sklusio Ganalenu, writes, and this is brought down by Rav Moshe Sternbach in Hakdamat and Moadim Vizmanim, that Chazal tell us that the only way to accomplish Torah is to kill oneself for the sake of the Torah. That the only accomplishment of the Torah takes shape in the place where a person has emptied themselves out for the sake of the Torah. And the Brisker Rav asks, what does this mean to kill oneself for the Torah? What does it mean to be memis as atzmo? And there's an amazing teaching about Kavyachal, the stoicism that rests at the heart of the Brisker Lumdus that can be mamtik, the cheftza, into a gavra, because ultimately when you see that it's a cheftza, you don't have to be feeling about it, and then you come to understand that the gavra is the one who has the way to frame what the cheftza is, and then you can understand the secret of applying focused emotional frameworks without the chaos of emotion. But ultimately, the Brisker Rav and that stoic element, and it finds expression in Rav Soloveitchik as well, that the Brisker Rav says what it means that a person has to kill themselves for the sake of the Torah is to ultimately become unfeeling, to not feel, to not be moved by reality, to not be moved by the happenings in reality. That, says the Brisker Rav, there will come a time in reality, and he was speaking at his place already with what was going on in Eretz Yisrael and what was going on in the world. And he said that there's a time where a person, a Bal Hergesh, is not going to be able to live because of the severity of all of the feelings. And the only way to live in that place is to kill off the feelings for a moment. Vayidom Aharon. To not necessarily feel everything that I'm feeling, to not judge everything that I'm feeling. To become an inanimate object doesn't mean to be unfeeling. A person cannot control their feelings, and God forbid when a person tries. But it means to not be overly interested in studying the depths of my feelings and their origins and not being so bothered by them, of turning my mind away from them. Vayidom Aron, entering into that place of silence, that place of the Kol Dama Madaka, because Rashi says something incredible. In the merit, in the reward of Aron HaKohen being silent in the place of this, of entering into that place of Shtika, that inner place, that island of okayness that rests at the heart of the storm at each and every moment, Aron was rewarded that Hashem spoke directly and only to him. That in the merit of his silence, Hashem decided to speak directly to him. He gave him his dibur, meaning to say that when a person silences themselves and enters into that place of kach Allah b'machshava, kach Allah b'machshava, Moshe Rabbeinu sees Rabbi Akiva suffering unimaginable suffering. Unimaginable suffering. We all see it. We all have the mind of Moshe, and we all see a reality of Rabbi Akiva, and we see it, and Moshe Rabbeinu is furious, and he says, Zu Torah v'zu schara, is this really how it goes? Is this what happens to Aron HaKohen? He loses Nadav and Avihu? And what HaKadosh Baruch Hu responds to Moshe Rabbeinu there is, Shtoik kach Allah b'machshava. Shtoik kach Allah b'machshava, be silent, for this is how it arose in my mind. And Leshem Shebeh V'Chaloima and Rabbi Nachman, they both say explicitly the same teaching. Don't think for a second that this is Hashem being capricious and saying, you don't have the right to ask me about what happened because it's my story. God forbid. But rather that the only way to make anything understandable, the only way to find meaning at the heart of all of these things is to enter into the place of machshava. Shtoik, be silent, and kach Allah b'machshava. Then you'll be able to ascend to the place of machshava. And in the world of machshava, a person has the ability to reorient themselves to everything. The thing that transforms everything is the mind. Chelek Elokai mimal mamish is the mind. It's our capacity to choose our orientation and framing of reality through the power of our mind. And the only way to enter into that place is through the demama, to silence the noise, the kol hamoina shel romi, all of the deafening noise that cries out from every fabric of existence, what Rabbi Nachman described as the tza'akos that are emergent from the chesronos that are either being emptied or filled at every moment of existence, the yalala and the kolos that scream out. But at the same point, that has the ability to be transformed into the shiros v'tishbachos that are screaming out in the secret of the future song, which is the secret of the demama, the shtika. That's why you speaking to me, says Moshe Rabbeinu. Speak to Klal Yisrael and move. Enter into that place of atika talya milsa. The words are already tied up in the place of atik. There's no words to say. That's the demama. That's Vayidom Aharon. He became like an inanimate object. He became an unfeeling thing that accepted all that was taking place, and from there he was able to be mamtik the process. Baal Shem Tov, the Heilige Baal Shem Tov says that Shtoik kach Allah b'machshava, like Rabbi Nachman, that through silence a person enters into that place of machshava. And that's the only way that a person can come to grapple with those unspeakable things. Only when a person silences the noise and creates the buffer zone to enter into that safe place in the innermost chamber of the mind, and to enter into that place of stillness, of the shah, of the flow, of connecting to that innermost sturdy point that is unshakable, only then can a person exit back out into the world of noise and remember the silence that rests at the heart of noise. Because without maintaining that silence, without holding on to that demama, to that silence, to that unspeakability, to the lack of need to affirm my position, for the lack of need to clarify everything, because I know that language fails, and ultimately all there is emunah, and therefore I don't have to speak everything that needs to be said. Only when I own the fact that at the core of all language rests the silence that exists beyond all language, and that demama, and that being like a doimim, of being that stone, then I can begin to speak. Then I can come from that place and speak, because then I speak silence. I speak silence. I speak calmness. Diburim benachas, calming words, therapeutic words. Language becomes the therapeutic tool through which a person can move forward. And this is the secret of the gaiva of the tzaddikim, the gaiva, the kedusha of every yid who recognizes that each and every one of us is Aron HaKohen, and each and every one of us goes through that process of Nadav and Avihu, and each and every one of us has the ability to call HaKadosh Baruch Hu out in that silent place. And that's what Rashi means when he says, through the silence of Aron, HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke directly to him. Because when we silence ourselves in that place, Mamela, HaKadosh Baruch Hu starts speaking through us. As Rabbi Nachman says, L'cha amar libi bikshu panayas panecha Hashem avakesh. If we listen and we attune ourselves to the hispoidedus that comes out of our own mouths, when we're not speaking and speaking at the same time, then we come to find that it's Ruach HaKodesh. So by entering into that place of silence, Mesyachid imo hadibor, HaKadosh Baruch Hu begins to speak through the individual. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Baal Menachem. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one who's saying Shah, Shah to the pain and to the difficulty of the external reality of Nadav and Avihu. And when a person, so the silence is never simply leaving myself in the empty, voided space of silence. It's always when I enter into that void of silence that exists beyond language, and I no longer need to fit things of my experience or my understanding into the vessels and limitations of language, I enter into a silence that's comforting. It's a silence that draws down life into the dried bones where speech has dried up. And this, Rabbi Nachman says, is the only way for a person to encounter the deep form of apikorsis, which is the apikorsis, the denial of God that emerges from the encounter with the voided space of godliness, with the reality that there appears to be a world that is devoid of the animating light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, where tzimtzum appears to be real, where tzimtzum, by definition of our intellectual postures in this world, must be real to one degree or another. It has to be real. That's what our minds tell us. That's what reality tells us. That's what Rabbi Nachman tells us. And the kfira and the apikorsis that comes from that encounter with the halal hapanui is the meaninglessness of it all, is the elongation of it all, is the uncertainty of it all, is the wondering of it all, of whether anything is actually anything at all, of whether any of it means anything. And that place of the halal hapanui, of the kfira, of these second types of questions, from the halal hapanui, from the place of the tzimtzum, those unspeakable things, the Nadav and Avihu. In that place, Rabbi Nachman says the only way out is to uncover the nigunim that rest in that place. And the only way to uncover the nigunim that rest in that place are through the silence of the self. And only a tzaddik like Moshe Rabbeinu can go down into that place, like Aron HaKohen could go down into that place and encounter the kach Allah b'machshava, and to go one step beyond the speechlessness of it all, but to go even higher into the place of demama and doim la Hashem, and the silence for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in that place, our silence begins to speak. Every moment of a Jew's silence in this world is louder than the speech of all of history. Every moment of silence, every silent connection with that place of shtika in our minds, with the shtika kehoda'ah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I transform all of my silence into praise. My silence becomes praise. Like the Evan, like the silent stone that in the future is going to be revealed to have been praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu out at every second. And how inanimate objects, ultimately, the doimim is the lowest level, but ultimately it bears the most energy. It's the Evan Masu Abanim Haisadosh Pina. Only in that silence, Ne'elamti Dibor, Ne'elamti Dibor, Ne'elamti Dibor, when there's nothing left to say, it's in that place that the self uncovers the secret language of silence that speaks louder and more profoundly than anything that can actually be said. And then we draw that back down into language. And this is the secret of Aron HaKohen, the gaiva of the tzaddikim, who are able to speak this silence to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chazal tell us that Talmud Chacham is allowed to have a shmini shebeshminis of gaiva in Maseches Sota, going through all of the questions of what element of self-orientation is a tzaddik allowed to have. And Chazal are very, very strict about really nearly nothing, because Chazal, as we said, is Gematria Ma. It's putting ourselves into question, as we're going to see the ultimate birth of Klal Yisrael is Pesach, and the orientation towards Pesach is just the question of Ma, Matzah, Mazeh, Manishtana. It's the light of Chazal. It's the Haggadah itself, how all of us become Chazal to one degree or another. Chazal understood that silence. But Chazal had to have an element of gaiva. Every tzaddik has to have an element of gaiva so that they can push back against HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Hanhaga in this world, to be mamtik zayin and to elevate all of the gvuros back to their shirish and to be mamtik all of the gezeros. And so Chazal say in the end that ultimately a tzaddik can have an eighth of gaiva, an eighth of an eighth. And Zakta Heilige Vilna Gaon Zchus Yogan Aleinu, that Shmini Shebeshminis is the eighth pasuk in the parsha of Shmini. Shmini Shebeshminis, the eighth pasuk in the parsha of Shmini, which is when HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu to tell Aron to be makriv himself to the korban, to come close to the altar, to come close, to come and do his avodah. And Rashi says over there that the reason that Aron HaKohen needed the chizuk was because he felt so shamed, he felt responsible with regards to the Chet HaEgel, that he was embarrassed to go up. He was embarrassed to move upwards and to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in that way. And the Shmini Shebeshminis is the koyach that Moshe Rabbeinu gives to Aron HaKohen through HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that says, no, a person always has to have that koyach of learning how to be silent with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of being silent and sitting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and not having words of thank you yet, but resting in that place of, I don't know anything. There's so much to say that all I can do is rest in that simple place of silence, that Shmini Shebeshminis, that capacity to be Vayidom Aharon, to make ourselves like a stone that doesn't know anything whatsoever other than what it needs to do in that moment. And Be'ezras Hashem, through that, we're mamtik everything, and we can transform ourselves into avanim, which are like the osios themselves. And when a person begins to transform into osios, they see that really my whole life is ultimately my mind's capacity to reorient meaning, to find new ways of expressing myself, through silence and speech, through speech and silence, and Be'ezras Hashem, through the koyach of the tzaddikim like Nadav and Avihu in each and every generation, Asar Hurge Malchus, Yosef Atzadik, we should be zoichet to his Oiris Nifla that comes from all of the Ga'aguim and the Shtika Kahodah and the Tfilos and the Tsar and the Yigi and the Simcha of Klal Yisrael down here to bring about the Ikar Hamshachas Hadibur, which is the secret of Mashiach, which is the secret of Mesiach, that Mashiach is going to be the one who teaches us how to speak, teaches us the work of Hisbodedus, and Be'ezras Hashem, we can be zoichet to Vayidom Aron in the holiest imaginable, most pleasant type of way, so that we could all be zoichet to Ulechein Nesiachet HaKadosh Baruch Hu Hadibur Imo, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu then began to speak only to him. Each and every person has the capacity to uncover the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the language of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kaviyachol, in their own lives, in their own mind, in a way that it was never expressed before, and the secret of Mibein Shnei Akruvim, the Hisbodedus of Meishiv Nafsho Bakapo, of giving oneself over completely to the secret of Va'ani Tefillah, that all I am is the silence and the praise of Tefillah, and we should be Zoicha Be'ezras Hashem to the Dibur Amiti of Geula Shlema.